Hello.
Hi. So sorry I was late. I had another call that ran over.
Oh, no problem at all. No problem at all. So just before we get started, it's on the consultation form and everything, but we do record our consultations just so that way they're available in case any information is needed later from them.
Yep.
Um, Other than that, my name is Elias. I'll be doing the consultation with you, and then we're here to talk about Blue, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and just start by letting me know maybe what type of issues you're trying to address with Blue or what your
Mhm.
goals are with training overall.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, I would say honestly, our issues are becoming not as prevalent, which is great, which I think is like why I'm engaging in this conversation because I want to take our relationship and like his ability to work to another level.
Mhm.
But I will say historically, I've and again it's getting a lot better, but there's still a little bit of it there is, and you probably experienced this with Blue, is he like there's a constant testing that's going on with him. Is he's trying to constantly get away with something or trying to like see if he can get his way, do things on his terms, right?
Mhm.
And there's so because of that there's always kind of been this power struggle between us.
Mhm.
I also think he's got a little bit of like a female, like he doesn't respect females as much. And so getting us to the point where we're more working like a team versus like working against each other, if that makes sense. Like that's the best way to describe it. And
Mhm.
honestly, in the last 3 weeks, he's come a really long way. Like I started doing some new stuff on our walk, just like intuitively, and he started like he's not pulling, he's just kind of like being at bay, which honestly it was always a constant, him deciding if he was going to listen or like what was going to happen, etc. So I would say right now we're at a place where he is, I think, like more trusting in me and I'm more trusting in him. And we've started to do our walks have started to be a little bit more like teamwork, where
Mhm.
he's truly like checking with me, he's paying attention to what's going on. There's less of him trying to like get an angle and more of him just enjoying the walk.
Mhm.
And he started to just like do commands without me having to say them, which is nice. So like we'll get to a crosswalk and I'll stop and he'll stop.
Okay.
Before it would be like he knew that he was supposed to stop, but he wouldn't, until I
Yeah.
said something. And so now he's starting to like do that. If I slow down, he slows down, and then he'll curb at the sidewalk.
Mhm.
And then I've started to do walks with just his e-collar on, where he's like off leash, and he's been doing like he'll stay by me the whole time. Again, not challenging, not really kind of being a team player.
Mhm.
So I think in terms of training goals, how that translates is I would love for I would love to get Blue to the point where he's exuding more like service dog qualities.
Oh.
Long term, I have some goals and dreams of opening some sort of like retreat center or some sort of like school where I'd love for Blue to kind of be like the guardian of the facility, right? Like keeping track of everybody, helping people cross the street, like really truly embodying that service dog nature of let me help you get this done, right? And so I would say that's where I want to go. So in the short term, I think it's about like um him being able to like lead a walk in the sense of a service dog would, right? Like looking for traffic, like making sure the other person is knows what's going on, like they're stopping before you do, like he's thinking of a walk as like an awareness thing where he's constantly assessing, what's going on and like, how do I kind of guide this person.
Mhm.
um and then potentially even I would love for there to be like things around the house that he could do as service. So I don't necessarily know what those are outside of like carrying something from the car or like carrying something from point A to point B, but those types of things. So like getting him in the mindset where again, it's more about service, and that is his work.
Mhm.
Versus like, as you know, he's very active, he's very athletic, and right now his work is like all of those things. And I think he's finally at a maturity point where he's more open to the calmer work, the more like service, service dog type of work. So that's it. I'm happy to dive in deeper on any of that, but hopefully that was helpful.
Okay. Yeah. That's definitely helpful to have like a direction of what you're trying to like go with Blue. Um, the first thing that I'll ask is what kind of e-collar is he on now and like what type of things you do with him with the e-collar?
Um, the e-collar, it has all three. I don't know if you need the brand, but it has like the 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 sound, the vibrate, and the like the shock.
Okay.
So it has all three options on it. I typically do the vibrate as like a warning,
Uh,
and he responds to that 100% of the time. But if there's like an escalated situation, I'll use the shock. Or if I like really want him to pay attention, like I'll use the shock. So we kind of go between the two. Right now, really, these walks where I'm kind of doing off leash walks are the only thing that I'm doing with the e-collar,
hmm,
in terms of like training. If I take him to the park pretty regularly and he has like a herding ball that he like runs around like a maniac.
hmm,
And I always have the e-collar on him there for the most part. And I'll use that, if he like runs off or there's another dog that comes, like those types of things, which are pretty rare these days, but just as like a security net. But those are really the only things. I've never really done a ton of training stuff outside of like I said, the walk that's happening right now.
okay. Um, do you know which like to what level your e-collar goes? Like is it like a 1 to 10 thing? Is it like a 1 to 100 thing?
I think it's to I think it's to like 10 or 10
Okay.
plus.
Okay. The only reason I ask is just because depending on the collar, we can see how Blue's like handling that kind of
Mhm.
stimulation and everything. When you're using it, how does he normally react to the stimulation button, like the shock button?
Um, he he like kind of like will go, because I don't use it that much anymore, because he's been so well behaved. So like when it comes, he's like, whoa. But I have it on like a 3 or a 4, like pretty low.
Huh?
Um, and he'll respond, like he knows that that's like a no,
Hmm.
but it's like a subtle response, but he responds.
Okay. All
That
right.
makes sense.
That sounds good to me. With the always kind of pushing boundaries and stuff. That's a thing that pretty much every dog will do to some degree. It's
Yeah.
just within their nature to, if they have a little extra slack, they're gonna see,
Mhm.
okay, maybe I can push a little more. We notice the same thing, like when we're doing different commands, like heel or place or down, like maybe they're like scooting just a little bit
Yeah.
forward each time.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's nothing really out of the ordinary. That being said, especially if you're trying to get him to do more advanced stuff later, then with any training that you might do with us, we would probably be a little bit more strict on him, just
Yeah.
so that way he has a more defined line of what he should and should not be doing.
Yeah.
Because dogs thrive in more of that black and white environment.
Yes.
There's gray area, there's room for misinterpretation.
Right.
And then we notice dogs kind of become gamblers basically, where they're like,
Yeah.
maybe this situation will be different, or maybe this
Yes.
situation I'm going to try this. And especially if you're looking for a level of consistency, that's
Yeah.
something we would want to have a really strong base of.
Yeah.
Um, with that, and as far as the previous issues he's had and like how he's improving with everything, um, I know that you also use like the prong collar and everything, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Hmm.
Um, so do you know necessarily why these tools are working for him?
Why they work for him?
Yeah.
I think it is a um I would say Blue, like he has a tendency to get like wrapped up in his emotions, to your point. Like, what can I get away with? Like, what can I not get away with? And I think it provides more of that like black and white line for him where he's like, okay, I'm not allowed to do that, or like I can't get away with that. I think it provides more. And I think just the to your point, like the response
Mm,
is it gets his attention, right? Where like it can take a lot to get his attention without it. Like there's no like there's no
yeah,
way like a regular collar would get his or like a harness, like forget it. You know, there's he would run all over that. Like he knows that he could get away with it, right? To your
yeah,
point, like he would see that I have some leeway, and he would take it.
yeah,
So obviously I would love to train out of that where like he feels like he needs to do that, and or like he wants to do that, right? So I feel like he's getting closer to
yeah,
that point. But we did so when I first adopted him, I did pretty rigorous training with him for over a year where we actually spent 6 months walking backwards, where he just had to like follow me and like learned like eye contact and like all
yeah.
stuff for 6 months.
No,
And so that's like what built our rapport. And
uh,
then we kind of moved to all the other things. So that's where he was introduced to the prong collar. We started with a slip collar, and then he definitely like needed a little bit more, so we moved up to the prong collar. But
mm,
I say all that to say that he's been on the prong collar for he's 8 years old now, like
mm,
for 7+ years
yeah,
at this point. So
yeah,
he's pretty familiar with it. And he's also he knows all the commands and exactly where he's supposed to be. Like there's no question about that. It's just a matter of, like you said, him the gray area of, or what can I get away with in this scenario where I can do it, 90% or 95% versus 100%. So
yeah, exactly. So so one, it's really good that Blue has been introduced to these different tools from a young age, because in a more, I guess, like broad sense, a lot of the tools are introducing something called physicality,
mhm,
and it's very straightforward. Like obviously, we're being like more physical with him than we are like trying to use words to convince him to do something,
mhm,
just because that's the main way that dogs are communicating to each other. So we're kind of just stepping
mhm.
like into their world using their language.
Yeah,
And that's most likely why you're also seeing a lot of success with the prong collars and everything like that. Because now it's really making sense to him, and you're really able to add that discipline and structure to where
yeah,
he's like, okay, like when this happens, like, all right, I know that that's my boundary there.
yeah.
Uh,
I
so
will say too, I've always used correction training. So like there's never treats have never been they
oh
when for the first 2 months
yeah,
or 3 months I had him, we tried and it was not going to work. So he's always been on correction training.
yeah,
And then obviously like there are verbal commands that support that, but
yeah,
he's always like physicality has always been his correction
yeah.
for most of his life.
And that makes sense too, because he is a very like confident dog.
Yes.
So for sure, if he wants to do something, I'm pretty sure he would try and just do it.
Yes.
So, and that's a good and a bad thing, obviously, depending on
Yes.
the situations.
Right.
But overall, it's very nice that he has this baseline, because as we move into more advanced e-collar stuff, he's not going to be trying to figure out what the e-collar is asking. It's
Right.
more to what degree is he needing to finally be willing to kind of go along with certain
Yep.
things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and with this as well, to kind of speak about like the correction training and the treats and stuff, we can also, especially since we're asking him to do more advanced stuff eventually, we can incorporate treats with the correction training,
Yep.
because in a way, the correction training is still providing some type of reward. It's more in the sense of like something being bad taken away from him though.
Right.
So
Right.
when he's feeling, for example, a tap from the e-collar, if he does what we're basically needing him to do, then
Mhm.
that correction is done.
Yep.
So he's like, okay, I'm not receiving that correction anymore. That's one reward in itself. And then you can also add in the food
Yeah.
after that just to make it that much more of a good thing that he's
Yeah.
doing. But that's more necessary as you get more and more advanced with him, because
Yep.
basically the more work you're asking him to do, his pace.
The higher the reward. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that being said, though, a baseline of e-collar stuff that we would probably want to introduce with him, just so that way he can at least get familiar with something that's a little bit more intensive of structure. And then also, I know that usually the way that we do e-collar stuff is slightly different from
Yep.
how different people do it. So,
Okay.
so that way we're not speaking in like a different language with him, kind
We're
of.
speaking the same language.
Yeah. As far as the e-collar that you're using right now, I would recommend to, depending on like, if you're gonna be following through with the training or anything, to switch to a more, like I would say professional collar.
Okay.
It's like the ones that we use here, are Dogtra, and those are the same collars that like working dogs use, police dogs use, pretty much everything that the dog is like doing a more formal job.
Yeah. Okay.
And the reason why is because one, they're just a little bit more consistent with the stimulation. So some collars can feel sharper, if that makes sense, whereas
Yeah.
they give a more rounded kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And then the other big thing is that the dog trick e-collars go from 0 to 127. So 127 might be the same as, let's say your collar is going to 10, might be the same as the 10 on your collar. We just have a wider gradient in between to find,
Got it.
so maybe like 30's too high for blue, maybe 20's too low,
Yeah.
and now we still have a whole 10 numbers in
it.
between.
Okay.
So that just makes it easier to be more specific to Blue's needs and to
Okay.
each situation that we might have him in. And then another thing is with the e-collar training that we do. It sounds pretty similar to what you're doing already as far as like what our heel would be looking like. But the structure of our heel, which is the first command that we teach, even if the dog already knows it, it's just so that they can kind of understand the rule set of what we're doing with the e-collar, is that Blue should be on your, do you walk him on your left or your right side?
My left.
Okay. Blue should be on your left side, his right shoulder in line with your left leg. And then he shouldn't pass, he shouldn't go behind, anything like that. And then when you come to a stop, kind of like you said, he's starting to do more and more now, we would reinforce that auto sit when you go to a stop.
Yeah. He
So
hates the auto sit. So
yeah.
he likes to just stand there. So he's gotten his way with that one. He doesn't like the quick sit. He doesn't
that makes
like
sense. I mean, just given the type of dog that he is. But normally the reason why we are more strict on reinforcing an auto sit there, it's because it's adding like another decision before he can be distracted by something. So when he's standing, let's say a squirrel runs by, okay, it's just one decision for him to go squirrel, and then he's kind of following it. Now, if he's in the auto sit, well, now it's one decision to set up, one decision to go for the squirrel, and it's introducing a little bit more structure there. So it's giving him a chance to kind of think twice and be like, do I really want to chase after the squirrel right now? Like, aren't I doing something important at the moment? So that's why we like to incorporate it there. Also, thinking ahead into like service dog stuff. If somebody is walking with him, ideally, when somebody comes to a stop, we don't want him kind of going off and like scavenging a little bit.
Correct.
We would want him just directly still right there, like at their side. So that's another thing just to reinforce that placement of him as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Just so that way, you know, maybe it's something small where he's like, what's this over here? I'm just going to take a quick little step. But then in that moment, he's also kind of distracted, you know?
Correct.
So that's the kind of structure we'll be introducing with the heel command. And then obviously being more strict with things, just so that way he gets that understanding of, okay, this is what happens every time. This is the heel command. So then ideally, for example, with my dog, since I've been doing the same commands with him for like years now, I I still put it on him when I'm outside with him just for the safety of it.
Yeah.
But I'm not really tapping on the e-collar for anything. He already knows, so he could be walking at my side in the command, and I don't necessarily have to even correct or anything.
Yeah. Right.
Um, and it's just because I was very strict with the consistency early on, so that
Yes.
now he's
Yeah.
just like that's just he knows like the drill basically.
Yep.
Any questions with that so far?
No, no, that makes sense. And I will say he has that same relationship with the e-collar too. Like he knows as soon as it goes on that he has a shorter leash.
Yeah,
And he's more likely to just do what he's supposed to do than like waiting for the command. So like to your point, it's like reinforcing, I think, all these little things
yeah,
to have this higher standard be the 100% of the time,
yeah,
so that then he can work more, which he loves to do. So I think he'll see that as a reward.
yeah. And that's really good too with the kind of like working mindset because it's going to make it easier to basically progress faster with him.
Yeah.
Just because sometimes dogs who are not really of the working mindset or to put it in a nice way, I guess they're just a little bit more like, oh, I want to lay down. I don't really want to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's not
Um,
blue.
yeah, we can usually see a lot of like frustration from them because they're like, oh, I don't want to do this. Uh,
Yeah.
but usually, I'm assuming with a dog like Blue, it should be a lot easier to kind of get that structure in line and everything.
Yeah.
Um, and then the second thing I'll say is that as far as when to have the e-collar on or off, especially at the beginning of training,
Hmm.
um, one, as a personal thing, I usually always recommend it on outside, even if
Yeah.
we're not planning on doing training or anything. Just
Hmm.
having it on is
Yeah.
a kind of like a peace of mind thing where
Yeah.
we always have that recall command available to us.
Hmm.
Inside, it's a little bit more specific to what you're trying to do with him.
Yeah.
So if you know that, for example, maybe you're just going to be like sitting on the couch watching a movie and nothing's going to be happening and Blue's tired, he's laying down, whatever, then
Hmm.
that's a time we obviously don't need to have it on him because we're not looking to kind of work with him in a way.
Right.
If, let's say, he's inside and we're needing him to do a certain thing, or maybe we're practicing like the place command with him where
Yeah.
he goes over to his bed and he stays on his bed until you release him,
Hmm.
then we would want to have the e-collar on him during those times, just so that way we can reinforce everything
Yeah.
very quick, especially at the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, one thing that I will add in that's like a possibility also in the future that you can do as far as training, um, is once he has all the basics down, it just kind of comes to mind as more of a service dog thing of you can teach him similarly with the place command. Branching off that, there's a command basically called like touch. And it's
Hmm.
like the same idea where he's going to put his two firm paws on an object or just basically touch an object. And I know that that's something that usually people who are doing more advanced stuff with their dogs enjoy, just
Yeah.
because I've seen different applications for it, like um, opening a door, turning on and off the lights,
Yeah.
opening different
That
things.
would be great. I mean,
Yeah,
he would love that. Like, I think to have like work to do around the house obviously make my life easier,
yeah,
which is wonderful. But I think he would honestly love it. Like, I think he would love it. So I think all of those things are on the table for sure. So yeah, that sounds great.
yeah. And there's even things to work on down the line as well, going in line with that like touch command type stuff.
Mhm.
If you like were to go over some like I guess like basic retrieval stuff and like outing things, then
Mhm.
that's kind of like the example you were
Yeah.
saying of like go pick up this like bag or something and bring it over
Yeah.
here and drop it,
Mhm.
things like that. So all of this stuff can be achieved pretty easily and straightforward with the e-collar. It's
Yeah.
more just getting the basics down so that way
Yeah.
that stuff becomes very easy.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, as far as the other basic commands, after heal, we would then go into recall, obviously, just because that's another very important one.
Mhm.
Um, that being said, if he already has a good recall, that should be fast, but we still go over.
He doesn't have a good recall.
Okay.
That's the one thing. It's okay. He's much better. Much better at heel. Not as the recall is a lot more. Again, with the e-collar, it's great.
Yeah.
But without it, no.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's not a problem. That just comes down to the same thing, just adding that consistency in for him to where when you say for him to come to you, you will make it happen every time. So that way he knows, okay, mom said that I should come over. Like that's just what I do.
Yeah.
And then that one's usually a pretty quick one to introduce, and then it's just gonna take that one takes the longest to practice, but the easiest to kind of introduce.
Yes.
Because over time, you don't want to drill it out too much to where he's already thinking ahead, and then he's like, "Oh, she's probably gonna recall me. I'm just gonna wait by her side." So spacing it out and and kind of catching him off guard with it is gonna be the best practice.
Yeah.
And then the other basic commands would just be the place command, as I mentioned. I already said heel, sit down, stay, and then we already went over recall and heel. So those other ones are just kind of like, the normal, like I say down, he should down here, and he shouldn't move from there. But again, a lot of that is going to be adding in structure to where maybe you're wanting him to practice just doing nothing and waiting there for a moment. So that would be a good one where maybe you use the down command when you're at the park and there's a lot of stuff going on, and then he has to remain in that down position, kind of doing nothing, but at the same time, it's very hard training for him because I'm sure he wants to be going.
Yeah, he wants to go and do stuff. Yeah.
But that self-control can be good to learn, especially since you're looking for that more advanced stuff down the line.
Yep. Great.
Any questions with any of like the commands?
No, he knows all of those. It's a matter of the like consistency and the 100%, like the 100% of the time. So, he's pretty good at the place. He'll try to place in like the spot that he's not supposed to, he's like, can I go to the left of the bed versus like, whatever. So he'll do that, but he knows what place means and like knows where he's supposed to be. It's like the consistency of, making that work and having that hard line. Same thing with down. So, that's great. And then, I was going to ask something else. Not related to the commands, but on the days that he's there for daycare, should I send him with his e-collar as we kind of get into this, or just like as he's been coming?
Yeah, I would say that once he's starting the training and stuff, you can send it, and it will be easy for us to kind of have it on him throughout the day while he's doing certain things, and then be doing like the place command with the other dogs and all that. That being said, in the long run, if you like were to forget it or something, we also have like e-collars here. So if he's e-collar trained, then whichever one we put on him will be fine.
Great.
But I wouldn't worry about it right now. I would just wait until you like are starting the training on. And then was there any behavioral issues you feel like you were having with him? Like any thing that doesn't fall under basically the commands or like obedience like that?
Yeah, so there are he does not typically do well with male dogs.
Oh yes, okay.
Yes. And so there's a couple things that I'll say. So the first is we live in a building that's like almost everybody in this whole building has a dog, and there are specifically 3 dogs in this building that it is like, in Blue he's not aggressive, but he'll like, how he is. Like, he just lets people know, like, I'm not, like, he's an instigator. Like, that's my favorite word for him. He's an instigator. So he knows that these other dogs are reactive. And so he riles them up, essentially. And so there's a lot of that happens. And I've started walking with him there's a lot of doorways and like hallways in our building. So I've started walking in front of him. So
Mhm.
like he can't go through the doorway before me because that's a spot where like an interaction can happen.
Yeah.
So I would say that there's those instances that happen, or like, you know, a practice of where I want him to feel secure and protected and also obedient in all of those interactions and not reacting to their reaction or him triggering them and vice
Yeah.
versa. It's the whole thing. There's that. And then I would say just in general, when he's around other dogs, like new dogs, especially male dogs, it's all about him asserting his dominance. Like he just
Okay.
wants to let everybody know that he's in charge.
Yeah.
And he does have a tendency, and he's not in that environment very often. Like I don't take him to dog parks. I don't put him in those situations where I'm going to like encourage that behavior. That's why he comes to daycare with you guys. Like, but he will, like, if there's a dog that, you know, he is a herder, so he like gets in their face, you know, and like barks at them and is like, I'm in charge here, like you're going to listen to me type
Mhm.
dominance behavior.
Yeah.
So those are things that, again, he's not in a ton of situations where those are happening anymore, but they are in his tendency for sure.
Okay.
And then I would just say there is, and I don't even know if this is like, he obviously has a lot of energy, and so there are times when, you know, I'm on calls all day and he gets like pretty insistent on like me paying attention to him.
Mhm.
And you know, I have like things that, like toys and things that he will play with on his own, but then he hits a threshold where he's like, no, like I want your attention and like your attention only, and I'm settling for nothing less. And so I think things that like he could do that would stimulate him, like even now, like he's just kind of walking around and like laying down and like we'll find something, but then he reaches a threshold where he's like, I'm over this, like come on.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that, which I think like maybe just our time being more stimulating together will just help him be more tired. So I think that those are really the biggest things, um outside of like you know, like what we already talked about, kind of that power struggle
Mhm.
situation. And again, like he has a tendency to really want to please men. Women, he like tests them incessantly. So I fall into that category, obviously. So I
Uh,
think there's a little bit of like a respect thing
mhm.
that he doesn't like fully have, um for me specifically. And then I think like, you know, overall. So those would probably be the biggest, but if I think of any others, I can let you know. But those are probably the biggest things.
Okay. Yeah, so that like dominant intention and everything. Funny enough, my dog's kind of the same way sometimes. Where he is very friendly, but if he wants to kind of be over a dog, he's gonna get very tall, kind of.
Yeah.
Um, but that being said, um, those types of things we can also easily address. Um, Given that if it's causing another dog to be reactive, that's something that we would also want to like address on Blue's end. So that way, thinking
Yes.
ahead that he's not, walking down the street one day and then sees a dog and is trying to cause problems with them or something.
Yes.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
with that and with the e-collar, it's very easy to address because all we would really be doing is one, having the very strict heel command should help with it just right off the bat, just
Mhm.
because we're like making this command so important to him that ideally he doesn't really have time to worry about what's going on over
Yeah.
here.
He just
Or like,
ignores it.
yeah,
Yeah.
like this distraction, this dog, it doesn't really matter because I need to make sure that I'm walking with mom over here.
Mhm.
Um, Another thing that we would want to do is start looking for, the signs of tension building, and we would want to correct early and often is how we would go about it. So maybe Blue like sees this dog and he looks for a second, but then he really starts to kind of like lock in and get tall, and like you can see him kind of really building that tension.
Yeah,
And
he'll stare,
yeah,
he just is like staring. Like he doesn't he'll not when he's like asserting himself, he'll get
yeah,
tall, but we'll be walking and he'll like see a dog and like, just the eyes are
yeah.
following that dog, and he's
Mhm.
starting to get more concerned with that dog than like what's happening,
Yeah,
on the walk.
exactly. And that whole time, basically, like the tension's building in his head. Even
Mhm.
though technically he's just staring, and we would, in most senses, like be okay with it, but we know that, okay, he's building tension.
Yeah.
So what we would want to do is start creating like a threshold for him to where, okay, he sees a dog, and maybe I'm going to let him look for like 4 seconds. Okay, he's staring now for 4 seconds. I know that this means he's starting to build. So then I
Mhm.
would correct right away with the e-collar to kind of snap him out of it.
Right.
Because if we address everything as it's building, it's way easier to bring Blue from like a 4 out of 10 as far
Yeah.
as attention, than it is to bring him down from, okay, 10 out of 10. Now he's
Right.
like having a real issue with this dog.
Right.
Um, so things like that and correcting right there when we see that tension building is going to start making that situation not worth it to him. So then
Yeah.
he's thinking, okay, I can look at this dog, but I don't really care because I know it's just not even worth it. I'm going to get the correction. Like they're not an issue. Um,
Mhm.
that being said, uh, sometimes we have found that we need to just bring up the threshold early and earlier, depending on the dog. So
Yeah.
maybe Blue is a dog where he can look for 5 seconds and then he can turn off. Or
Right.
maybe he's like, okay, he only gets 2 seconds because I know that he's already gonna just jump up.
Yeah.
So that's something that you can feel out with him and see like what are his signs of, oh, there's tension now. And then as you do that, it should also just create more structure to everything, because
Yeah.
all this thing that's normally making him like draw all of his attention is something that he just shouldn't be caring about anymore.
Right.
Obviously, if the dog were to be like coming up to you in a dangerous manner, he would still have the desire to be like, oh, like what's going on here?
Right.
But in the sense of walking and this dog's just over here and nothing's really happening, we don't really need Blue to be concerned with that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
now,
and I will say like some of the um I think there's a sense of like him not feeling like safe.
mhm,
And so I think making sure that I think having the structure will help, and letting him, some of it is like his own, like you're actually safe, like you don't need to worry about it. And then I think that there are dogs in my building who are very reactive, that their owners don't have
yeah,
control over them, and like I know that I'm going to protect him, but I don't know that he knows that I'm going to protect him, so I want
yeah,
to make sure that that bond, and like, I'm doing the right things,
mhm,
so that he does feel like, okay, even if I know this dog, he knows this dog, and I know this dog are out of control, like
mhm,
I he still feels confident to be at ease,
mhm.
in the situation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's will tie in with turning off this reactivity, because even
Right.
if their dog's being reactive, we can at least make sure that Blue's not going to be reactive. So
Hmm.
maybe their dog's like freaking out and everything, but we still would get Blue to the point of, okay, whatever, I don't
Yep.
care.
Right.
Because then as we keep repeating that, he's going to start to understand like, oh, like I don't have to do anything and everything's just fine. And
Yeah.
then more and more he'll see like this dog's freaking out. Okay, whatever. I'm on a walk with my mom. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Hmm.
So um again, just tying into that consistency of like having the same like kind of good thing happen each time.
Yep.
And then as far as tension, like with other dogs in like the playpen or anything, yeah, we've seen that sometimes. But again, it's pretty easy to correct with him. And I think
Yes.
that given that you adding in all this extra stuff into like your life with him as well, it's gonna be kind of always on for him as far
Mhm.
as like what's behaviors expected of him. Because when we address any tension in the playpen, he's usually just like perfectly fine of like, okay, my bad, and then just goes and
Yeah.
does his own thing. And the more and more we've done it, the more like we've been able to like trust him with like all different kinds of dogs, and he's not
Yep.
having issues. So with that, that's a very straightforward thing. Again, once we start adding in the e-collar and everything like that. As far as the respecting kind of different people thing, that's something that will also be very easily taken care of, because with the e-collar, when we're adding in commands and structure with that, let's say Blue's number on the e-collar is like 30. 30 for me is going to be the same as 30 for you, which is going to be the same as 30 for whoever
Right.
is going to be with him.
Yeah, right.
So once we start adding that in, and he starts to learn, okay, this is the same correction for everybody, there's no reason for him to view anybody differently, really, as in terms of like how serious he's going to take them,
Yeah.
because it's all going to be the same outcome. So he's like, all right, what's the same rules for everybody?
Yeah,
And
that's
so
good. Yeah.
that's a very quick and easy thing.
Yeah.
And it makes it very easy to transfer. For example, if Blue needs to be with someone else for a day or something,
Right,
and they have
right.
the collar, all like, it's very easy. Just press the button, and it's all the same to him, kind of.
He definitely he acts different with every person because he knows what he can get away with every single individual.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's gonna happen. That's
Yeah.
the dog even does the same. Where even with the e-collar, like he knows that, like for example, let's say he's with my mom. Like my mom's gonna maybe use it a lot less than I would, so that
Right.
he kind of learns like, okay, I have different rules
Yeah.
with mom.
Yeah, when
But
I yeah.
that being said, when he comes back to me, he already knows.
Right. He does
So
it right.
you're
Yeah.
not really losing anything.
Correct. Yeah. Agree.
Other than that, as far as programs, did you have any type of route that you were looking at specifically, or did you just want me to give you my recommendations on it?
I think your recommendation would be great. I mean, it sounds like the e-collar training would be wonderful. I think I'd probably, in terms of like number of weeks commitment,
Mhm.
want to do like if we could do something at the shorter like middle of the road just to kind of see where it's at, because I agree with you. I think he'll pick up on things really quickly, and then it's just a matter of how far do we want to go. So I don't want to undercommit, but I don't want to overcommit. So I think
Yeah.
like doing a shorter period to just kind of see where he's at, and then we can kind of reassess,
Yeah.
after several weeks, and then from there kind of determine, okay, he's picking up things at this clip, like this is where, we can do a part two, or,
Yeah.
what have you.
Yeah. So I would recommend you, because our programs go from all the way from the smallest 3 week to the longest
Mhm.
12 week. I would recommend staying between the 3 and the 6 week. I wouldn't
Okay.
go over the 6 week, because then, like you said, I feel like it would be too much time where we're just trying to get the basics down first and seeing how that goes.
Yeah.
3 weeks would be like the tighter timeline of, okay, 2 classes that are mainly focused on heel and other stuff that comes along with like being on a walk and everything, and then your other class on recall. So that's like kind of the bare minimum of like heel, recall, and making sure everything's really good with that.
Yeah.
And that also is like the easiest thing to practice, because you're going on walks with him, you're going to the park with
Mhm.
him. And that's before any like auxiliary commands.
Yeah.
6 weeks is going to be a little bit more stretched out if you're wanting to have those extra classes to start to touch on like, okay, I want to go over the place command, or okay, I want to go over like maybe like the out command more formally or something like
Mhm.
that. Or maybe I want to have a session at in home to address something more specific in home or something.
Mhm.
Um, those are different things that you can set up with those extra classes, but it'll still be the first 3 being on heel and recall.
Got it. Okay,
Um,
great.
so you don't have to decide anything right now, but that's the range I would stick between. And
Okay.
that's in the follow-up email after this consultation. That's what will be recommended to you, and we'll kind of break that down more
Okay.
in the email. As far as an e-collar, um, if I were to recommend you a Dogtra one, it would be the Dogtra 1900S Black Edition.
Okay.
If you're trying to stick with yours now, you're more than welcome to try it and bring it to the lesson and see how everything's going with it. But if it seems like we're not able to communicate as clearly to him with the
Mhm.
type of color that you're using right now, then we would have you get the Dog Trail 1900S Black Edition.
Okay.
Um, this collar is a collar that's usually for larger dogs, but given that Blue is one, kind of more of like a power breed, two, he's very confident, and then three, he does have that kind of ability to get a little standoffish with dogs sometimes. We would want to have the most range kind of available to us, just so
Mhm.
that way we know that if a situation occurs where maybe a lower end collar is not necessarily doing it for him, we
Yeah.
still have a little bit of a ceiling to work with.
Okay.
Um, but those are the recommendations for the collar and the class, and I'll include those in the follow-up email as well.
Okay.
And then did you have any other questions or anything regarding the programs or the collar?
No, I don't think so. So it sounds like start with the the e-collar basics, and then we can kind of evaluate on like an auxiliary, which would be like the
Yeah,
next set of training.
and keep in mind if you do decide to do like, let's say instead of the 3 week, you decide to do the 6 week, and you don't want to necessarily use all those classes in sequence right away, you're more
Mhm.
than welcome to use however many you use. And then let's say you have two classes left over, those can be saved as well if you're wanting to just like practice some things and then do the next step.
Okay.
It's really up to you how that's going to be scheduled out. Uh,
Okay.
but you can also kind of set up the same thing for the 3 week if you just want to focus on heel and then set
Yep.
up your recall class later. So it's
Got
up
it.
to you as far as scheduling and how that's going to work with your um, but other than that, I think that's about it, unless there was anything else that you wanted to add or had questions on.
No, I think that's all. Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah. So keep an eye out for that follow-up email. It's going to be coming from Jesse's assistant, Maria. It'll have again all the recommendations, and then if any questions do come up, um, once you get that email, you're more than welcome to ask in there, or I think you've been in contact with Elizabeth through the info email as well. You can ask there as well, and if it is a training related question, then it'll be brought to either Jesse or myself, so that way we can still help you out with anything.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. That sounds great.
Okie dokie. Well, I'll go ahead, get this email together, and then I'll finish up this consultation here.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. You have a nice day.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.